Hey everybody, it's Todd Linder here with LaunchPoint, and today I'm talking with Jake Jeffcoat, who has an incredible story being in ministry, starting really at the bottom in some ways, super involved in his church, and has now made a really cool transition out into the corporate world, and now even starting his own business. I'm really excited for you, Jake, to share your story with anyone who's watching this. So let's start from the beginning. Who are you? And give us a little insight into your journey into ministry specifically.
Yeah. So, like you said, I'm Jake. And my journey to ministry, specifically to church ministry, was kind of several years. So, when I started out and first felt like I needed to go into ministry, it was strictly parachurch, right? It was let's go to these really awesome, fun organizations that work with high schoolers and college students, just like that worked with me when I was in high school and when I was in college. Like, I want to do that for the rest my life, like a young life, when very involved in that was my first ministry job, part-time job in young life. It was amazing. I loved it. And then realized post graduation that there was this other calling specifically with college students. And so I worked very shortly for 6 months on a contract basis with parachurch ministry, just doing curriculum for college students. And from there, my wife actually got a job at a church, and she had been working there for about a year. And after that contract ended, I knew that I still really want to do ministry. I don't know if I want to continue to go into the parachurch world. Started feeling this calling because I was so involved in the church that we were at the time. I was like, what could I possibly do for this church? Right? I love the people, I love the mission. How can I possibly get my foot in the door? And you kind of alluded to it, starting basically from the bottom. And so there was this one role that was opened up, and it was a part-time role. And my job was to basically manage inventory and stock refrigerators at the church. And my wife at the time led that position. And so she was my boss. We were newly married. And it was
I
definitely a
love that.
humbling, yeah, it was definitely a humbling experience for my wife to tell me, hey, we don't have any more, drinks in this refrigerator. Can you go stock it? And it was my job, 29 hours a week to go and push a cart around and make sure that these fridges were stocked. But it's really a testament to do the small things right, and then you can get entrusted with some bigger things. And so I did that for about 4 months, where that was my only gig at the church. And then an opening on our pastor's team became available, to where he needed basically an assistant on Sundays, and then someone that could help a lot with his schedule, some social media stuff, travel with him to different events as needed. We got to do some pretty cool stuff. And I did that for about 18 months as well. So,
Okay, so it was started out, just kind of a recap. Started out, I just love being around these high school kids, want to be in a place that I'm serving
yep.
these kids like I was served when I was their age. That
Right.
so it sounds like something or someone made a really big impact on your life that actually drew you into ministry in the first place. Is that right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. It was my young life leader throughout high school. And I actually followed him when I went to college. He took over a new area and he hired me as for my first job in parachurch ministry. And so it was kind of this cool full circle moment where he led me in young life, really from wildlife, from sixth grade to eighth grade, and then ninth grade to 12th grade. And then I got to work with him when I moved to college. And I wanted to be him. I wanted his life. I wanted the flexibility he seemed to have. I mean, I wanted the impact that he had on people. I wanted all of that.
Man, what a cool legacy for someone to leave where you can be so great at what you do and make such a life impact that at least one of the people who you've impacted, they're like, I want to be exactly like you.
Yeah.
And I want to follow in your footsteps, which led you to work with him part time,
Mhm.
led you into the curriculum job, led you into working with your wife at this church, and then ended up as the assistant to this pastor. And you said all of this. How long were you actually in ministry
Oh
before
man.
you started thinking about making that change?
Yeah, so total I was in ministry for about 6 years, and about at year 5, I started wondering what it could be like to not work in ministry, and that was the first time I thought that in my adult life, what would it look like for me to get a quote unquote real job, I know that ministry is a real job, but a lot of times the stigma is that, hey, the corporate world is work, and then ministry is service, and it's stuff like that. Nothing could be farther from the truth. We all know that, especially if you've been in ministries. I've never worked more hours than when I was in ministry, and I now run a startup, and that I don't sleep at night. And so um it's definitely work, but it was a long process to get to that point, and then an even longer process to actually make the final decision to transition.
Yeah. Jake, I'd love to hear more about that specifically, starting with what really made you start thinking about making a change into a non-ministry role?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag, I think, of like 4 to 5 different things. One, I was not at all fulfilled in the role that I was doing, and there's a lot of times that people I feel like, because I definitely felt this, of, well, I'm doing work for the kingdom. I might be stocking refrigerators and doing grunt work as an assistant, but like I should be fulfilled because at the end of the day, people on Sundays are being affected. People on Sundays, their lives are getting changed.
Oh my
And
gosh, I just have to stop you right there. I want you to continue, but you said something that I think anybody who's in ministry and thinking about moving out probably needs to hear is that I'm doing this work and I should be fulfilled
right.
because it's for the kingdom and people
Mhm.
are being impacted on Sundays.
Yeah.
I just like I want to hear more about that. And so I hope that will you incorporate some more of that as you're telling the
Oh
story? Because I
yeah.
think that's so many people that I talk to have that sentiment of that tension between I should be okay. I should be doing this. And but I don't feel fulfilled and I'm not sure why. So keep talking, but I'd love for you to weave some more in that. I think that's really
Yeah.
important.
For sure. So, and I think it's kind of it can come from multiple different places. So, it can be a situation like mine where I was directly told that I should be fulfilled anyway. That like it doesn't matter what, necessarily your strengths are or your passions are. Like at the end of the day, your passion needs to be to make Jesus' name known, and this is how you're doing it right now. So be fulfilled. And then other people might not be told that. They just might be feeling it internally and feeling a lot of guilt for not wanting to be a part of it anymore full time, right? Or not want to make a career out of it. And the analogy that I've used before is like imagine your career as like a bus, there are a lot of different seats on the bus. And so my bus was ministry, and then there were a lot of different seats on that bus. I'm sure there is one seat that would have been really great for me, that would align with my passions and my giftings and everything like that. I was probably in the furthest seat away from that seat, you know? And at the end of the day, me being in that seat, the wrong seat, allowed me to realize that this bus that I've thought was the most important bus, career that someone could have because it revolved around ministry, and it was ministry, was not the right bus for me at all. And through my job at the church, I had a lot of people that I looked up to, people that mentored me that were not in ministry, that had those corporate jobs or that owned businesses. And I saw them make impacts that were far and away more effective than anything I had done. And quite frankly,
Wow,
anything other
interesting.
people at the church had done. So that made me start thinking like truly ministry. in your life is not directly related to working at a church. Like there is
Yeah.
such thing as using the marketplace as your ministry, and like something that we used to talk a lot about at the church is you don't if you're a plumber, for instance, you don't have to, and you're a believer, you don't have to call yourself like a Christian plumber. You just need to be the best plumber in the city. I know you've probably heard that a million times too. And it's like that's a sentiment that I really took seriously, is I don't have to be working at a church. I don't have to force myself to sit in the wrong seat on the wrong bus. I can go find the right seat on a totally different bus and still make a huge impact for the kingdom, and probably make more of an impact for the kingdom because I'm walking in how God designed me in the first place, which I think is super, super important. And that gets overlooked. I know I overlooked it for years and years working in the church ministry, just thinking, oh, I'm called to make an impact, so I have to do this, not realizing that it was actually minimizing the impact that I can make because I wasn't able to work out of the giftings and the callings that I actually had in my life.
Man, that is so important what you just said about understanding that a calling is somewhat has to do with like the wiring and how God's created you. Like if you're going to work for the glory of God and maximize that in your gifting, and you have the opportunity to, and God's opening a door for you to do that. Obviously, what you're talking about is the bus that you're on. And I'd love for you to talk about this a little bit more. There's a discernment as to when do you get off the bus?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we're not, I mean, the Christian life is not an easy life, or it's not supposed to be. And we have the gift of living in the West in the year right now is 2023. And compared to pretty much all of history, and still compared to the rest of the world, we got it easy. No matter
Yeah.
like if you have a job, you've got it pretty good, just generally. I mean, there's hard stuff, obviously, but generally you got it pretty good. But there is a discernment that you're talking about a little bit of, okay, this is hard. When do I, or how do I try to figure out if I'm on the right seat? How do I move to the right seat? Or is this the right bus for me completely? How, can you help me understand a little bit more? Can you talk a little bit more about that discernment process?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm probably not the best to share any of my personal experiences here because I feel like I waited way too long before I got off the bus. I waited until I didn't even trust the bus that I was on, where I'd
Oh,
sat in the
wow.
wrong seat for so long. I obviously got to see a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I didn't agree with. I knew I didn't agree with. I never spoke up about it because again, you should be fulfilled because you're doing the Lord's work. So I knew that I needed to leave probably a year before I actually did. Um, and so that caused obviously a lot of like resentment and things like that, that I piled up for close to 12 months, to where when I actually left, I was like, I don't not only not want to work in at this church anymore. I will never work at any church ever again.
Wow.
And since then, things obviously have shifted. But it's very important, I feel like, for people that when they start to get an inkling of, hey, maybe this isn't actually where I'm called to be, to seriously talk to people about it because the people that are closest in your life are going to know um, what is right and what is wrong for you, sometimes more than you know what is right and what is wrong for you. And so it was also tough because my wife still worked at the church, several years after I left. And so that was obviously this unique uh, situation of, I had all these feelings, but I didn't want to taint the experience that she was having because hers was different because she was in the right seat, like she was totally fulfilled in her job and loved it for years and years and years. And then she obviously recently made that transition too, about 2 years ago, out of ministry into the medical field. But my biggest thing with people that are transitioning is basically just say, hey, if you're thinking about transitioning, really explore that, really pray about it, don't feel guilty about it, know that this could be as much of a calling on your life transitioning out as transitioning in, and that it's no less important to explore that calling, to do that calling, and then to pursue it. So
Man, I love that, Jake. What you described is something that I tell clients is uh, who is shooting on your career.
yeah.
And there's a
Right.
play on words there for sure,
Yeah.
but it's the like, what are the shoulds that you're hearing in your life, and where are those shoulds coming from, right? So you should do this, you should feel this way, you should enjoy this, or you should feel grateful to be in whatever place that you're in right now. And what are those things, comparing them with honestly, like the word of God,
Hmm.
discerning, wise people, your community, people who love you enough to be honest with you. And then where is it coming from? And most of the times when we're in ministry, these shoulds are very well intentioned.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes it's because that person who is telling us these shoulds, they're shoulding on themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. They're
They're
just
telling
passing it
them,
right down.
yeah, that's either that's come from someone else, or that's their internal narrative for whatever hard thing they've gone through, and they're just kind of like passing it on. And what I'm hearing you say is we can't live someone else's dream for them, and we
Right.
can't live under someone else's expectations if that's not the place that God's put them in our life. And
Yeah.
so if you feel it, it's okay, have the freedom to explore it and get clarity, so you don't have the resentment and you don't have those negative feelings towards
Right.
people or burnout, and that takes you a long time to recover from. Is that
Yeah.
kind of what you're saying?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
Man, thanks so much for sharing that. Want
Yeah.
to want to transition just a little bit into what was your job experience, or what was your experience like as you were making the transition? Because you went from that job at the church, helping a pastor, to now moving into a more corporate environment. I'd love to hear what were some of the challenges that you were facing, both very practical ones, but also some like maybe mental challenges that you went through, or mindset challenges that you went through as you were making that transition.
Yeah. It was a lot harder of a transition, I think. Mainly just landing somewhere was a hard transition, because I knew what I didn't want to be a part of, and I knew how I didn't want to how I didn't want to associate my career to like my happiness, meaning like I had sat on the wrong seat for so long, and so I was very intentional of trying to find the right seat at the right place, and so I put a lot of stipulations on the place I wanted to work, but that obviously narrowed down the options that I had. And then going into, you know, a career and a job where I ultimately ended up getting the position, had been employed and working and out of college longer than probably most people that had that position, but because my experience was ministry and it wasn't business, or corporate, that's the role that I was put in, and I loved it and I thrived there and I eventually got promotions. Um, but I had a hard time. How do I put that I stocked refrigerators on my resume for a church? Like what do you say there? Like that's
Right,
not
right.
that's not going to relate to anybody in business. Like who like I don't want to be an executive assistant to someone. So like what do I put that I wasn't the executive assistant to like some Fortune 500 CEO. He was my pastor. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how do I word that on the resume? We didn't even call it an assistant. We called it something different that nobody else would. They were like, did you drive cars? Like what was your role here? And so
Yeah,
um
funny how ministry positions get different names and like what everybody else in the world calls them.
right. And so it was a complete mind shift of being, and I think maybe you're the one that told me this years ago, of like, hey, if this is what you did and this is what you're job details were. This is the role that looks like in the corporate world. So if you were, you know, this position at the church and you helped manage schedules, you helped plan meetings, you helped, you know, communicate stuff to the team, you help this, like maybe that job title is actually chief of staff, you know, or something else that's not like whatever we called it at the church, right? And so that's the first time I started thinking of like, okay, well, how does this directly translate into the marketplace, you know, and then how can I position myself in that spot in the marketplace? And it was, I mean, it was not easy. I remember after I got the job, my boss's boss came up to me, and he's like the final interview. So as I was transitioning into this new company, it took me like 6 months to find a job after I left. It was very difficult. It was a
Oh
time
man.
consuming process. A lot of places
Wait,
wouldn't.
so did you leave the church and then go find a new job?
Yes. So I had no job
Okay.
lined up when I left. So I
Okay.
left
Wow.
and interviewed at a lot of different places, had a lot of different places that I didn't get interviews at, made it to the final round a lot of times, and then was told, well, your experience, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's just not a right fit right now. But when I finally made it to the last interview, a place I really wanted to work, it was with the senior director of operations at the company, you know, and thankfully he really liked me and he offered me the job. But I remember like 2 or 3 weeks into me working there, I was in conversation with him, and he said that when he goes into interviews and thinks about hiring people, he ranks them from 0 to 5. So 5 being like, yes, we have to hire this person yesterday. 0 being like, no chance. This person's terrible. He said that this is terrible, but he said when I came in and he saw my experience, my work experience, specifically at the church, and unfortunately, specifically at this church, he said that it put me at a -2 going into the interview.
Oh
And
my gosh.
I will never forget that. He was like, you
Wow.
started that interview at a -2. And that's not everybody's experience, you know, but like that was my experience. So I didn't have to go from, you know, starting an average at 2.5 to 5. You know, I had to go from -2 to 5. And I didn't know that. You know, thankfully I didn't know that, or else I probably would have been terrible in the interview, you know. Um, but I think it says a lot about how people sometimes view ministry workers, you know, or the stigma that can be there. And it definitely shows a lot about how hard the transition from ministry to marketplace can be. So,
Yeah. I'm so curious because I think a lot of people who are either have been in ministry in the past and have made the transition would resonate with what you just said to me like, oh my gosh, yes, I had to go through all these interviews. People would overlook me because of that. I think a lot of people who are currently trying to make that decision or trying to make that transition are experiencing something similar, wondering if they are a -2 out of the 0 to 5. So,
mhm.
how did you specifically overcome that bias, whether intentional or unintentional is less important, that bias and that like kind of set you back a little bit? How did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to be the best plumber in the city, you know, like be try to do your job. So like I'll kind of break it down into 2 sections. One, when you're interviewing into it, prepare for the interview, you know, like learn a lot about that organization and then make it best interview that they've seen in the job search process. And then if you overcome that big hurdle, when you start the job, become the best person in that role at that organization, you know, and prove to them that like the experience at the end of the day taught me a lot, you know, and it's not just, it shouldn't be overlooked because it was a ministry. And you can say a lot about how to platform yourself in your career based on the work you do and the relationships that you build with people within your organization, um, than you can about anything that's on a resume.
Yeah, so it's you got to get into the interview
Yeah.
first,
Yeah.
which is part of the challenging part.
That's tough.
But once you get there, that's when you just got to be the best. You got to have them like, yo, oh, this guy is different. This person that just walked in this room or just left this room, they're different. We didn't expect that. Almost like a good surprise
Yeah.
coming out of that.
Yeah. And I don't think
So
that
go ahead.
I don't think that's specific with just people transitioning from ministry in the marketplace either. I think that's a rule of thumb for anybody that wants to get a job. It's like, hey, if you're getting ready for an interview, you make it the best interview that that person has. Be super enjoyable, be super conversational, um, ask them questions. Like that's super important. But I think that if you are transitioning out of ministry, that could be a little bit more important to be sure that you nail that down.
Yeah. And then really quickly before we get on to some of our last questions, um, how do you think that you got from application to interview? How do you think you made that first jump successfully? Because from the conversations that I'm having, that's one of the biggest hurdles to
Mm-hmm.
overcome. As most
Yeah.
people feel like if I get in the interviews, I can probably figure it out, but I got to get to the interview first. What were some of the things that were helpful for you in that?
Yeah. So mine might be a little more unique because I actually knew a couple people that worked at the organization. So I was able to leverage those connections and people internally already that could vouch for me to be able to get an interview. Because there were more places that I didn't get an interview than I did, right? But the places that I did get interviews, probably 75% of them, I knew folks that worked there already. And that was part of living in a bigger city. Obviously, having a lot of friends and connections at the church as well that just went to the church. Um, but oftentimes, those recommendations from people either internally or people that are connections with them on LinkedIn or have a very good reputation in the marketplace, like all that can be leveraged to really help you out.
Yeah. You said something that I think is important. You said it kind of in passing, but it can feel really taboo to talk about leading a ministry or leading a church. But some of your best chances of getting a job, and in your case it was, are the people who are already there in the ministry and they don't think it's taboo. They're
Right.
like totally cool with it. They want to support you, they want to help you. It just, you got to get over that, like, well, what if it gets back to the head pastor, or what if it gets back to my boss? Because you can politely ask them not to share.
Yeah. Oh, and you
And
told,
if
yeah,
they and if you do share, or if they do share, well, then you just need to pick different friends.
you do. Yeah.
but
And yeah, no, that's,
but that
that's,
that's I think it's really important that it may feel that way, but that is honestly going to be your fast track. I like to call those back doors. Like
yes.
the application process is the front door, and those
Hmm.
have gatekeepers and they have a guard there, and there's a code that you have to get in.
Yep.
But those people, those are back doors, and those back doors are not as heavily guarded, which is what it sounds like why you were able to get all of the interviews that you got and ended up getting that you landed.
Yeah. And I think you said something really good. It's not dirty to ask people for help and to not share that with your leadership at the church. That's not a dirty thing to do. It might feel dirty to be looking for other jobs while you're in a job, specifically when you're looking to transition out of ministry and you work in ministry. That's not a dirty thing to do. You're not naughty for doing that. It's not a sin as long as you're not lying about it, being like, no, I'm not looking for another job, and you clearly are. Like, um, but it happens everywhere.
Yeah. Jake, I'd love for you to give a sense of like, where are you now? Because I want people to see, like, okay, well, what's the possibilities if they have dreams in their hearts? Like I did. I know that I spent first 7 years out of college working ministry, worked for a ministry while I was in college. So if you put it all together, I probably spent over a decade working ministry, but I had other dreams that weren't going to be fulfilled in ministry. And I know that you had the same. Can you give us a little sense of where you landed and very short journey to where you are now.
Yeah, yeah. So I landed in a business role in Atlanta working for a really, really, really awesome organization there. I honestly loved every day going to work, but there was still a part of me that had felt the same thing I'd felt since being a kid that, like, hey, I have a lot of vision for what I imagine my life to be, for what I imagine my family's life to be, me and my wife, how we want to live, what we want to do. I have a lot of good thoughts in my mind, of how business should be done. And my mind is always thinking through like ideas and uh, creating and casting vision. And for a long time, I felt like that was going to be planting a church, starting a ministry. But then I realized that it wasn't, right? And so through being equipped within the job I finally got in Atlanta, the business job, of learning the ins and outs of how to manage a P&L, how to hire and fire team members, how to lead a team and make sure that they're feeling uh, very equipped and also they're growing at the same time, how to help lead and build great culture. All that was amazing, but I still knew that eventually I was going to have to branch out and do this on my own, or else I would never feel fulfilled. And so a couple years ago, I actually called you for a little bit of advice on this, and was like, hey man, look, this is this thing I've been thinking about for a while. It's this new business. It's a tech product that doesn't exist. I think I'm going to start raising money and get investments and start this business. And we've been working on that now it's been my full-time role for a year. Is when I was able to transition out of my job I got after ministry into working for the new company. And we have a startup of 5 people that are absolutely amazing. And we're
So
doing
fun, man.
a lot of cool things. It's very stressful at times, like any job can be, but I feel so fulfilled and I'm so happy with what I'm doing. And I know that right now in my life, this is what I am called to do, is what I'm doing right now. And in 10 years, that could change, but right now it's this, and I couldn't be more happy with it.
Man, I love that, Jake, because in the beginning, you said you felt called to ministry. And now you're building a tech product that you're feeling called to.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Some people have a singular calling for their entire life
Mhm.
vocationally. Some
Yeah.
people have a singular calling that's not vocational and can manifest itself in a lot of different vocations. And that's
Yeah.
what you're experiencing. So that's super cool. And I just want to add, you didn't say this, but I'm going to brag on you because I know your story. You got to that organization out of ministry and you got promoted multiple times
Mhm.
and like pretty quickly and got lots of opportunity. And how much of your how much of your past ministry experience do you think contributed to getting those positions pretty quickly?
Yeah, honestly, I think a lot of it did. Um, I was used to working with people, and that's one of the biggest benefits that coming from ministry will give you in the marketplace is that business, yeah, it's a lot about numbers. It's a lot about strategy. But at the end of the day, no one can convince me otherwise. Business is about people and ministry is about people, and some of the best people I've ever met in my entire life are in ministry or they come from ministry. So utilize that. That's what I had to do, is utilize that one gifting, but also experience that I gained from working in ministry and leading small groups, going on clubs, going to club with Young Life students on Monday nights, like getting to know people, seeing how, a high school student or someone in my small group or something like that could really be benefited from living for the kingdom. And then you can transition that and say, hey, I have this person on my team. I can see that these are their giftings. I feel like I can communicate the vision of the organization clearly to them. And then I can help them utilize their giftings to advance the vision of the organization. Right. And I feel like I was platformed really well to do that from my time in ministry. I don't think any of that is from me just being naturally good at it. I feel like it's you learn that over time, and there's still so much that I have to learn in that, but I do feel like that helped.
Yeah. And that's the reality is sometimes when you make the transition, some people may not see initially what you
Mhm.
have to bring to the table because it's not like a technical skill or you didn't have a specific set of experiences. But once you make the transition, you're uniquely positioned to outperform everyone else
Yeah.
because of the ministry experience you've had, which when people see that in the business world, not all the time like ministry, because promotion doesn't happen in ministry the way it does in the business world most of the time. It's a lot based on performance, capacity, ability, but also potential.
Yeah.
And as someone coming from ministry, you have so much potential to rise quickly. So don't be discouraged if you feel like you're taking a step back, because one step back may actually be three steps forward
Exactly.
in the next few years. So, okay, Jake, thank you so much for your time, man. Before we close
Yeah.
it down, what's one piece of advice that you could give somebody if they're looking to transition from ministry into a marketplace job?
Yeah, I feel like I've already really touched on it. But the biggest thing is truthfully don't wait too long. Don't wait until you resent either the church or the ministry that you're working at, or even worse, you resent the big C church, or all of ministry because you got so burnt out on doing it. And I think that's something that a lot of people feel, but not enough people talk about, is that ministry burnout is a real thing. And I feel like it happens a lot when people are working in ministry because they think they should be fulfilled, as we've talked about, and when in reality, they're not fulfilled at all. So recognize that if you have that at all, it's totally normal. And there are thousands of people that have also felt that and have made the transition. And there are thousands more that never acted on it and never sought wise counsel, and never decided to leave, and they end up leaving the faith, or they end up hating church altogether. And I think it's just super super important to not feel guilty or dirty, or like you're denying God for wanting to transition out of ministry into the marketplace. So
Yeah. Starting the discernment process.
yeah,
You're not taking a step, you're
no,
just
it's
exploring.
okay to explore
Uh,
it. Yeah.
yeah, it's okay to explore it. Jake, where can people find you if they're interested in your story more, like they want to reach out to you, or they're just interested in what you're doing? You've got a really cool thing going called Redline. Where can they find you? What's the best place?
Yeah, so anybody can go to my LinkedIn. It's just Jake Jeffcoat. They probably will type in Jeffcoat at some point. It happens all the time, but it's Jake Jeffcoat. And then yeah, our company is called Regline. They can find us at reglineoutdoors.com. They can download our app, which is Regline, on the App Store or Google Play Store. And happy to talk to whoever wants to reach out.
Awesome. Jake, you're amazing. Thanks so much for your time, man.
Yeah, man, of course. Thank you so much.